I'd now like to introduce Jocasta, Sibbel, Senior Policy Officer from the office. Jocasta will outline for us both the methodology used for the consultation and the key themes and recommendations that came from it. Thanks, Jocasta. Sorry.
Thanks very much, Jenny, and thanks, Desi. It was a fantastic presentation and so wonderful to hear your story. You should all have on your seat a copy of the executive summary of the Listen to Us report. That was the report that was tabled in Parliament earlier. Much of the information that I'll be talking about today is included in that executive summary. Plus the slides will be available on our website a bit later, as well as the recording of this presentation. So those of you who might be inclined to take notes, please don't feel you need to. Consistent with the Commissioner's function to prioritise the interests of Aboriginal children and young people, our previous work has always included Aboriginal children and young people's views to a range of varying degrees. With this project, we wanted to focus solely on Aboriginal kids, to engage as widely as possible and to tap into the diversity of their views, experiences and the situations they represent. So looking at this data and acknowledging that there are concerns with the reliability of such data, we know we have a significant proportion of Aboriginal kids living in regional and remote areas, and these are widely scattered through the state. We also have a significant cohort of Aboriginal kids in the metro area, and while they represent the smallest proportion of Aboriginal kids to non-Aboriginal kids, in terms of actual numbers, metro Aboriginal kids actually represent the largest single group. So, for example, the 15,000 plus Aboriginal kids represent only 3.5% of kids in the metro area, whereas the 2,000 kids who live in the West Kimberley actually make up about 80% of children and young people in that area. As the Commissioner has already mentioned, and I know that you are all only too well aware, our Aboriginal children and young people do fare poorly compared to non-Aboriginal kids across a range of significant indicators, and our lack of progress in addressing these continues to be really disappointing. Gains have been made in some areas, such as infant mortality and life expectancy, but the reality is that suicide and mental health and the rates of imprisonment and rates of children being taken into care are getting worse. And on many other indicators, there's simply been no significant change, or we don't even have sufficient data to know what's actually happening on the ground. Not to diminish the significance of this, we do know that lots of Aboriginal children and young people are actually doing really well. And in this project, we set out to find what in their views was important to their lives and what were their hopes for the future. We didn't set out to conduct scientific research. There are many, much more expert people out there doing really quality work. What we aimed to do was do a consultation with as many and as diverse a group as possible of Aboriginal kids across WA. So, our approach, as it always is with our consultations, is to work really collaboratively with as many stakeholders as we can identify and engage. We formed a reference group to guide the project, which included representatives from government, community, education and research, as well as Aboriginal children and young people. Following an expression of interest process, we engaged 17 organisations who work directly with Aboriginal kids. This was a diverse range of organisations, including local government, health and welfare services, unity research groups, as well as Aboriginal corporations. These groups used a diverse range of methods to explore questions that we'd posed to gather the broad views of children and young people who access and participate in their organisations. When we looked then at the geographical and other gaps left by these consultations, we engaged further with communities. We used an Aboriginal engagement officer who went out to communities to talk to members and to encourage kids to have their say, and we also used an online survey. As you can see from the map, the consultation is really widespread. It gives a lovely diverse picture. We ended up with over 1,200 kids from across the state between the ages of 5 and 18 years. This generated a rich repository of information on what Aboriginal children and young people believe is important to their wellbeing. 5 key themes did emerge when we analysed this data. These themes are not dissimilar to other consultations we've done, such as the wellbeing consultation we held in 2009. Family, education and recreation are core shared themes. Belonging, identity and acknowledgement are also key in other consultations, and I think these share some commonality with the culture and racism issues that were raised in this consultation. These themes are also quite consistent with other research, such as the Erasing Nest work in those areas. So looking more in detail at those 5 key themes, the first one's family and community. The wellbeing of families and the strength of communities in which they live are fundamental in determining health and wellbeing of children and young people. While family and community were often interrelated, it's also useful just to look at separately at what children and young people said for each of these areas. Children in this consultation most frequently and not surprisingly nominated family as the most important factor in their lives. The definition of family was often quite broad and included aunts, uncles, cousins, all playing significant roles, as well, of course, as grandparents. The significance of family related to feeling safe and supported. There was a sense of endurance of relationship that provided security into the future and a source of fun and recreation. Not surprisingly, some participants also identified problems that occur in families. The impact of alcohol, drugs and violence on preventing children and young people from having the benefit of loving and caring families was certainly mentioned. Financial problems and the capacities of families to earn decent livings, to secure housing and to provide otherwise for their families made it apparent that kids were very aware of the stresses that their families were under and how hard this made everything for them. Turning to community, the broader community was also identified by many children and young people as being significant to feeling safe and supported and to their having a sense of identity and belonging. Positive and negative attributes of communities were raised in both large and small communities, as well as metro and regional groups. The quality of the physical environment impacts on how children learn, how they play, and how they interact with each other and with the wider community. Many comments were made on the quality of buildings and on infrastructure, and wanting improvements to things like their schools, as well as wanting improvements to increase their feeling of being safe in their community. The next theme is culture. Children and young people were asked about the meaning of culture to them, and it elicited a broad range of responses, and Desi shared some of those with you earlier. Many children and young people did see culture as fundamental to their identity and as a real source of pride. Culture plays a key role in the development of identity and a sense of belonging, and it does promote well-being and resilience. Connection to country, learning from elders, language and traditional activities were all cited by children in the consultation as being really important in their lives. Not all participants, though, were connected to their culture. Some spoke about not knowing much about their culture, and others spoke about really wanting an opportunity to learn more. The third key theme is education and aspirations. There was a clear understanding from children and young people about the connection between having a good education, getting a good job, and having a good quality of life through their future. Many kids said they enjoyed being at school and view their school as one of the really positive things about their community. But there was also some dissonance between recognising the importance of school and actually being able to attend regularly and to actually achieve well at school. Support from parents and families was identified as important to children and young people's education, both in terms of encouraging the importance of learning and also through practical support. Cost was identified by some kids as a barrier, and problems at home, like drinking and violence, was seen as a problem to education by some kids. Support from teachers and the need for extra tutoring was also identified as important and sometimes lacking. Participants talked about the impact of negative experiences in school, such as racism, bullying, maybe not trusting a teacher or not liking a teacher, and these were sometimes factors in their unwillingness to attend school. Making school more culturally relevant was seen as encouraging Aboriginal kids to attend, as well as helping to address the issue of racism that comes up later in the key themes. Recreational activities emerged as the fourth key theme. Participation in recreational activities supports children and young people's physical, social, emotional and cognitive development and their well-being. Recreational activities are often an area where kids who aren't good at the academic learning can actually build a sense of confidence and competence that enhances their resilience for the other aspects of their life. Many Aboriginal children and young people emphasised recreation as important to them. And of course, sport was mentioned the most. But it wasn't just about sport. They also highlighted things like water parks, access to playgrounds, being outdoors, being in contact with nature, having access to shopping, entertainment, as well as things like cultural facilities. Unstructured opportunities to socialise were also identified as important. And what was apparent was the need to provide a variety of recreational opportunities for these kids. Children in Perth were more likely to be satisfied with the variety of options that were available to them, while, again, not surprisingly, there was an almost universal desire for more diverse activities to be available to children living in regional WA. This also links a bit to the racism theme, where some children and young people reported that their access to recreational activities is curtailed by suspicion that they're going to cause trouble, by feeling unwelcome in public spaces. Also significant were things like safety issues regarding different venues, lighting at night, transport. Practical support is so important. Things like the Kids Sport program has been such a great support to many Aboriginal kids in WA, and this was identified by what they said in the consultation. The final key theme is racism and reconciliation. From my own perspective, it's one of the many really interesting aspects of this consultation. Despite there being no specific questions about these areas, these issues were frequently raised. It's clear these issues are important to children and young people, with many reporting feeling judged, discriminated against, or made to feel uncomfortable because they're Aboriginal, or an awareness that the Aboriginal community as a whole may be subject to racist treatment. Young people spoke about what they perceived as ignorance among the non-Aboriginal population about Aboriginal culture, as well as about government policies relating to Aboriginal people. Some kids indicated they were unaware of existing complaints-based mechanisms and legislative protections against racial discrimination. Dealing with racism in schools, sports programs, employment and in the broader community, such as addressing the feeling of feeling welcome in shopping centres, all came out as important to Aboriginal kids in this consultation. Promoting Aboriginal culture was also seen as important and seen as really important and fundamental to being able to address racism and reconciliation. So that was just a really quick summary of those themes. As I mentioned, they're in the exec summary, and of course, each has its own chapter in the document itself. To conclude, I just want to make a couple of brief remarks about how to use the Listen to Us report. As the Commissioner noted, this document does add to a significant existing body of work that has already been undertaken to determine how to strengthen Aboriginal wellbeing. It adds by presenting the voices of children and young people. It doesn't stand alone, and we know there are no silver bullets in this area. It is intended to be a practical document and one that provides enough depth and information to be used to take concrete actions. Principles of good practice are identified under each of the 5 key themes, and these are outlined towards the end of each individual chapter. These principles are based on the best available evidence and should be utilised as a foundation for service delivery. Furthermore, the final section of the report, which is entitled Listening and Taking Action, outlines 4 key approaches and 8 key strategies. These can be found on pages 16 and 17 in the copy you have of the executive summary document. While the report is comprehensive, so that agencies can take this information provided about the views of children and young people and act on these, our hope is that this information is also used as the beginning of a conversation, an ongoing conversation with children and young people that involves commitment by everyone to listen to and respond to their views. Thank you.